Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to continue reading the book Philosophy, An Introduction to the Art of Wondering. This will be the first chapter after the introduction, which was the previous video. Okay, so today we are going to cover interesting topics, and it will include references to the work of important philosophers in human history. Okay, so let's get started. The World Riddle. Shortly before the solar eclipse was to occur in central India, an Indian physicist who was also a member of the Brahmin caste was lecturing to his students at the university. He told them precisely when the event would begin and described in detail how the moon's orbit would take it between the sun and the earth. In their city, there would be only a partial eclipse, but on a world map he pointed out the path of totality as it moved across the terrestrial globe to the north of them. They discussed such things as the corona, solar flares, the beauty of annular rings, and the appearance of Bailey's beads during that rare total eclipse. Some of the students from the rural villages had heard stories about the giant dragon that swallowed the sun, but their teachers' lucid presentation of celestial mechanics had dispelled any fears they might have felt. Having dismissed his class, the professor returned to his village and, since he was a Brahmin, assumed his duties as a priest. Around his shoulders, he dropped the vestments of his office and began counting through his string of beads, calling aloud the names of the gods. A goat was beheaded in sacrifice to Kali, the blood goddess, the cause and controller of earthquakes, storms, and other evil things, and the arch enemy of demons. Prayers were offered to her that she might frighten away the dragon. Glory to Mother Kali, the priest and people chanted. While in the classroom, there was nothing illogical about describing the solar eclipse in terms of celestial mechanics. Neither was there anything wrong in offering a gift to the blood goddess, just in case. That is a riddle. To sensitive spirits of all ages, life is filled with cruel contradictions and bitter ironies. Human experience is capricious, and our finite minds are not able to see enough of life at one time for us to know for sure what is going on. We see only fragments of life and never the whole. We are not unlike children struggling with a jigsaw puzzle handed to us as a cosmic joke. Just under the surface of the entire human enterprise, implicit in all we think and do, there lies the eternal question: what is the meaning of existence? It is the ultimate question of all mankind, yet it must be reopened by each of us in our turn. If we refuse to take the contradictions of life for granted, if we can't accept prepackaged solutions, if we can't persuade ourselves to accept a mere fragment of life as the whole of life, then for all of us, the question persists. While we may have great difficulty finding satisfactory answers to it, we also know that there is no escape from it. On the real life scene, where the human tragicomedy plays itself out, our question splits into two further practical questions. Stated positively, how can we make life worth living? Stated negatively, how can we prevent life from turning into tragedy? Through the ages, man has sought clues to life meaning through his religions and philosophies. To date, they have given us immense help, but a contemporary overview of mankind's quest supplies us with a superabundance of answers, so many answers in fact, that we can't decide among them. Some would attempt to evade the problem by a leap of faith into a garden of plastic flowers, while others play a sort of religious roulette. But such arbitrary shortcuts fail to face the essential complexity of human existence. Furthermore, after a more critical re-examination, we discovered that most of man's religions and many of his philosophies have concluded that in the final analysis, life in this world is not worth living. At best, it's but a time of troubles to be endured until we can reach something better. Today, that's a conclusion we find difficult to live with. Yet, in Panshin's Rite of Passage, the heroine, a younger, states candidly, if you want to escape life, you have to accept the whole bloody universe. She may be right, but how can we really accept a universe of wild and destructive contradictions? After all, we seem to be as ambivalent about ultimate realities as the Indian physicist priest. The natural world is not the contradiction today that it was some 4 centuries ago with the birth of the new science. We are fairly secure in our general mathematical descriptions of the physical universe. Our scientific laws will undergo continued refinement and of course, and there is little doubt that we will discover new realms or new dimensions of realities. But there is such a high degree of consistency to our experience of nature's operations that we have arrived at the point of accepting a naturalistic worldview for nature. With this physical universe, from galaxies and gravity fields to television and laser beams, we have made our peace. Though our comprehension of nature is far from complete, we can live with the foundations of understanding so far secured. The unintegrated cosmos, which challenged the existence of ancient men and eluded their understanding, is no longer a bewildering problem to us. Our serious problems, therefore, lie buried somewhere within the protoplasmatic venture which we call life. To borrow a phrase from Buckminster Fuller, the puzzlement seems to be that this protoplasmatic experiment came without an instruction manual. Long before the birth of modern psychology, there were perceptive individuals who felt stirrings from the depths of the human organism, but it was left to Sigmund Freud to launch the fantastic journey into the inner world. As the Viennese doctors shook loose the secrets of the human psyche, it was no longer deniable that the subconscious mind, quite without our conscious permission, pushes us headlong into all forms of irrational behavior. The subconscious mind is a vast depository for emotionally charged experience which, for one reason or another, we cannot face, and these repressed elements determine to a large extent how we feel, think, and behave. But to realize that we do countless things without understanding why, this can be a soul-jarring discovery. We are manipulated like puppets on a string by inner forces over which we have little control. We scurry about in frenzied activity, accomplishing little else than satisfying the whims and shadowy slave driver. Not knowing our motivations, we don't understand what we do, and much of the time our striving brings little fulfillment. Perhaps here is one source of the meaninglessness of our lives. We have no clear notion of what we are after, but we plunge blindly ahead in search of something. "Good morning," said the little prince. "Good morning," said the railway switchman. "What do you do here?" the little prince asked. I sort out travelers in bundles of 1,000, said the switchman. I send off the train that carried them, now to the right, now to the left. And a brilliantly lighted express train shook the switchman's cabin as it rushed by with a roar like thunder. They are in a great hurry, said the little prince. What are they looking for? Not even the locomotive engineer knows that, said the switchman. And a second brilliantly lighted express thundered by in the opposite direction. Are they coming back already? Demanded the little prince. These are not the same ones, said the switchman. It is an exchange. Were they not satisfied where they were? Asked the little prince. No one is ever satisfied where he is, said the switchman. And they heard the roaring thunder of a third brilliantly lighted express. Are they pursuing the first travelers? Demanded the little prince. They are pursuing nothing at all, said the switchman. They are asleep in there. Or, if they are not asleep, they are yawning. Only the children are flattening their noses against their window panes. Only the children know what they are looking for, said the little prince. They waste their time over a rag doll, and it becomes very important to them, and if anybody takes it away from them, they cry. They are lucky, the switchman said. Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince. In Freud's word, life is at once a blessing and a curse. For Eros, the life force, is pitted in mortal combat against Thanatos, the death wish. On the one hand, we possess drives toward self-preservation which countermand almost all other impulses. We fear the cessation of breath and sense. Let me not see the death which I ever dread, cried the hero of the Gilgamesh epic 3,000 years ago. While alive, we dream our dream, work toward our goals, and feel the joyous pain of activity and growth. All this indicates the death of our hunger for life. We will fight to the death in order to live. Eros. On the other hand, to exist is to suffer, taught the Buddha. And we have devised ingenious ways of escaping existence. We sense a futility in our dreams. An inner voice chides us for yearning for goals we can achieve. We often have an empty feeling when we hold in our hands something we have fought for, wondering why we wanted it. All around us we see loneliness, absurd hatreds, and pointless sadisms. Mephistopheles speaks for many. Hell is not fable, for his life is hell. Away from all this, we are pulled toward death as though it would be a blessing to have done with it. Thanatos. Out of frustration, perhaps, we ought to ask whether the essential implications of so many of men's religions and philosophies might be correct after all. The implication that the human condition is uninhabitable. Perhaps it really is possible that there is something inherently wrong. Perhaps Norman Brown is close when he calls man a disease. It's not inconceivable that self-destruction in some sense is already an accomplished fact. Albert Schweitzer once wrote that he remained optimistic because hope is an indispensable ingredient of daily life, but that when he took a long look at human history, he could not escape the gloom of pessimism. When asked if he were optimistic these days about the state of the world, Alan Watts replied, "I have to be. There is no alternative, for if I were to bet, I would bet that the human race will destroy itself by 2000. But there's nowhere to place the bet." Modern men are caught in an existential vacant, writes Viktor Frankl. a feeling of the total and ultimate meaninglessness of their lives. They lack the awareness of a meaning worth living for. They are haunted by the experience of their inner emptiness, a void within themselves. The existential vacant is a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century. This is understandable. It may be due to a twofold loss that man had to undergo since he became a truly human being. At the beginning of human history, man lost some of the basic animal instincts in which an animal behavior is embedded and by which it is secured. Such security, like paradise, is close to man forever. Man has to make choices. In addition to this, however, man has suffered another loss in his more recent development. The tradition that had buttressed his behavior are now rapidly diminishing. Not instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Soon he will not know what he wants to do. The search for life, if it is to succeed, must be an individual odyssey. Each of us is caught in the philosophical enterprise. There is no one of us who is not trying to make sense of this experience, and at some level of our being, each is seeking fulfillment. Our experiences come pouring into us endless variety, and they do not come neatly packaged and labeled. Each one of us must select and assimilate, organize and arrange, value and apply. So, we are all philosophers by default, not by choice. To be sure, we must seek the guidance of others who have searched. We can listen to those who have found answers that work for them. But in the last analysis, no one else can donate an insight to us. It has to be indigenous, ground from native soil. Nor is our quest for meaning a quixotic tilting after windmills. There are many who find to some degree what they are seeking. They find the clues that set them in the right direction. When we listen to their recounting of what has happened in their lives, we cannot doubt the depth of meaning to which their insights have led them. Each of the following men, at some point in his search, found an answer or a perspective which affected the quality of his entire existence. After working through the long hard days with his patients at the Lambarene Hospital, Albert Schweitzer would retire to his cluttered study in the evening and take up again the problem from which he could not escape. He was attempting to discover a positive ethical principle upon which civilization could be securely grounded. For months on end, I lived in a continual state of mental excitement. Without the least success, I led my thoughts to be concentrated even all through my daily work at the hospital on the real nature of world and life affirmation and of ethics, and on the question of what they have in common. I was wandering about in a thicket in which no path was to be found. I was leaning with all my might against an iron door which would not yield. While in this mental condition, I had to undertake a longish journey on the river. Slowly we crept upstream, laboriously feeling it was the dry season for the channels between the sandbanks. Lost in thought, I sat on the deck of the barge, struggling to find the elementary and universal conception of the ethical, which I had not discovered in any philosophy. Sheet after sheet I covered with disconnected sentences, merely to keep myself concentrated on the problem. Late on the third day, at the very moment when at sunset we were making our way through a herd of hippopotamuses, there flashed upon my mind, unforeseen and unsought, the phrase, reverence for life. The iron door had yielded. The path in the thicket had become visible. Now I had found my way to the idea in which world and life affirmation and ethics are contained side by side. The worldview of reverence for life follows from taking the world as it is, and the world means the horrible in the glorious, the meaninglessness in the meaningful, the sorrowful in the joyful. However it is looked at, it remains to many a riddle. But that does not mean that we need to stand before the problem of life at our wits' end, because we have to renounce all hope of comprehending the course of world events as having a meaning. Reverence for life brings us into a spiritual relation with the world which is independent of all knowledge of the universe. It renews itself in us every time we look thoughtfully at ourselves and the life around us. Reverence for life. In that principle, my life has found a firm footing and a clear path to follow. Reverence for life. The editors of Psychology Today wrote a brief note about the death of Dr. Abraham Maslow. In it, they remarked that he had a joyful affirmation of life that searched through the long tapes he often dictated for us, encouraging Psychology Today to explore questions that have no easy answers. Much as we loved this beautiful man, we did not understand the source of his courage until the late cassette came in. On that tape, they said Dr. Maslow talked with intense introspection about an earlier heart attack that had come right after he completed an important piece of work. I had really spent myself. This was the best I could do, and here was not only a good time to die, but I was even willing to die. It was what David N. Levy called the completions of the acts, the completions of the act. It was like a good ending, a good close. I think actors and dramatists have that sense of the right moment for a good ending, with a phenomenological sense of good completion, that there was nothing more you could add. My attitude toward life changed. The word I use for it now is the post-mortem life. I could just as easily have died, so that my living constitutes a kind of an extra, a bonus. It's all gravy. Therefore, I might just as well live as if I had already died. One very important aspect of the post-mortem life is that everything gets doubly precious, gets piercingly important. You get staffed by things, the flowers, and by babies, and by beautiful things. Just the very act of living, of walking and breathing and eating and having friends and chatting. Everything seems to look more beautiful rather than less, and one gets the much intensified sense of miracles. I guess you could say that post-mortem life permits a kind of spontaneity that's greater than anything else could make possible. If you are reconciled with death, or even if you are pretty well assured that you will have a good death, a dignified one, then every single moment of every single day is transformed, because the purposive undercurrent, the fear of death, is removed. I am living an end life where everything ought to be an end in itself, where I shouldn't waste any time preparing for the future or occupying myself with means to later ends. Abe's message ended there. The editors. Dr. Gordon Allport has written in the preface to Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. As a long-time prisoner in bestial concentration camps, Viktor Frankl found himself stripped to naked existence. His father, mother, brother, and his wife died in camps or were sent to the gas ovens, so that, excepting for his sister, his entire family perished in these camps. How could he, every possession lost, every value destroyed, suffering from hunger, cold, and brutality, hourly expecting extermination, how could he find life worth preserving? From Frankel's autobiographical fragment, the reader learned much. He learns what a human being does when he suddenly realizes he has nothing to lose except his so ridiculously naked life. Frankel's description of the mixed flow of emotions and apathy is arresting. First, to the rescue comes a cold, detached curiosity concerning one's fate. Swiftly to come strategies to preserve the remnants of one's life, though the chances of surviving are slight. Hunger, humiliation, fear, and deep anger at injustice are rendered tolerable by closely guarded images of beloved persons, by religion, by a grim sense of humor, and even by glimpses of the healing beauties of nature, a tree or a sunset. But these moments of comfort do not establish the will to live unless they help the prisoner make larger sense out of his apparently senseless suffering. It is here that we encounter the central theme of existentialism. To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. If there is a purpose in life at all, there must be a purpose in suffering and in dying, but no man can tell another what this purpose is. Each must find out for himself and must accept the responsibility that his answer prescribes. If he succeeds, he will continue to grow in spite of his indignities. Frankl is fond of quoting Nietzsche: "He who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow." Our urge to ask why seems irresistible. If, for example, an avalanche plunges down the mountainside, burying 60 school children in a few seconds, is it humanly possible for the families of the children not to ask why it happened? Nor is a naturalistic answer satisfying, even though a scientifically adequate may be quite possible. The avalanche was produced by a week of especially warm days alternating with cold nights. Much snow melted during those days, and when the water refroze at night, the expanding ice gradually loosened the snowbank. The slide occurred during the daytime because melting snow finally produced enough water to weaken the last friction spots holding the snowbank to the mountainside. The snow gave way and cascaded down the slope. Such an explanation is scientifically sound. However, at the mass funeral service for the children, I imagine in your mind the presiding clergyman presenting the scientific naturalistic explanation for the tragedy and stopping there. Does this not prove Frankel's thesis that, above all else, man must find meaning in his living and finally in his dying? It would be comforting to know that life has meaning. It would feel good to know that nothing happens without a purpose. But our needs for meaning leads us to find easy and absurd answers to our why questions. In the year AD 410, when the city of Rome fell to Alaric the Goth, the pagans blamed the Christians for having abandoned the true gods of Rome. But St. Augustine spent a dozen years writing The City of God to show that the fall of Rome was a part of God's plan to vanquish paganism and establish the reign of God. In November of 1755, one of the world's worst earthquakes struck Lisbon. In a few minutes, more than 30,000 people were killed. The event occurred on All Saints' Day, when churches throughout the land were filled with worshippers. French clergymen interpreted the disaster as punishment for the sins of the Portuguese. Protestants blamed the event upon the tyranny of the Catholics, while the Roman clergy led the event to the fact that there were so many Protestant heretics in Catholic Portugal. In April 1970, after the near-tragic Apollo 13 lunar mission was aborted, an American political leader stated on national television that mission failure was a warning from God that man is not to attempt further ventures into space. A warning, he said, man's next attempt would result in tragic consequences. In a hotel in East Africa, weary hunters relax from their safaris into the veldt. In the hotel lounge, one finds a comfortable set of sofas covered with zebra skins, and on one wall hangs several lion skins separated by a dozen or so Maasai spears spread out as a fan. Higher up, on all four walls of the lounging area, are mounted heads of game animals. One looks up at the heads of the great African antelopes, elands with long straight horns, kudus with screwed twisted spires, dainty gazelles, stately stables with long, back curving horns, and wildebeests with short, upturned hooks. Other sentinels which look down upon visitors include the legendary African buffalo, whose horns cover its forehead and spread widely on either side, a rhinoceros with double horns rising from its snout, and a warthog with ivory tusks coming out of either side of his lower jaw and curling over its nose. Various smaller game animals are mounted between the larger heads. Down through evolutionary time, each animal had developed a means of defense and or killing. The overwhelming and singular thrust of evolution seems to have been to produce some mechanism of survival against attackers, horns to hold predators at bay, spiked tusks to rip apart and kill, fangs, claws, sharp hooves, thick skins, powerful jaws, sleek, strong legs for running and jumping. Each animal must exist in an unending competition with other creatures that would kill it. Species prey upon species. Nature is, after all, red in tooth and claw. No single animal had anything to say about it. It possessed no freedom to choose a lifestyle. Its place in this kind of nature is entirely determined for it. What a strange, impertinent thought that any single individual animal could have had freedom to choose its own lifestyle or to determine its role in life. What forces would design creatures to prey upon one another and, at the same time, instill into each creature the capacity for intense pain and suffering? And what an unbelievable ironic condition in this deadly feast of life, each of us, in order to exist, must eat living things which harbor the same life drive we possess. Life feeds upon itself. Desmond Morris is quite sure that our problems are genetic in origin. In The Naked Eye, he refers to the deep-seated biological characteristic of our species and contends that certain patterns of social behavior will always be with us, at least until there has been some new major change in our makeup. Species that have evolved special killing techniques for dealing with their prey seldom employ this when dealing with their own kind. But man's trouble, writes Conrad Lawrence, arises from his being a basically harmless omnivorous creature, lacking in natural weapons with which to kill prey, and therefore also devoid of the built-in safety devices which prevent professional carnivores from abusing their killing power to destroy fellow members of their own species. The law of the jungle, writes Morris, is that you don't kill your own kind. Those species that fail to obey this law have long since become extinct. It was in early spring when Captain Jacques Cousteau's oceanographic vessel Calypso anchored anchored off the shore of a southern California island. One night his crewmen noticed a churning of the waters and the ship's lights were turned on. In the water were millions of squid 6 to 10 inches long. Cousteau and his men had accidentally discovered the breeding ground of the sea arrows. The small squid returned here in cycles of 2 or 3 years to mate, lay their eggs, and die. Arriving on the scene by the millions, they milled around, waiting. Then a frenzy of mating began. The females had developed their eggs in tubular egg cases. Now, as the sea arrows darted about, males would grab females and hold them fast in their arms. A special tentacle was used to insert a capsule of sperm under the mantle of the female. The mating continued for days. Then, the females extracted the elongated egg cases from their bodies and attached them in clusters to the rocks below, where the cases slowly swayed like fingers covering the bottom of the ocean. Each female would carefully place 6 to 8 egg cases in position. With the last case attached, her time was finished. She went limp and died. The male's fertilization completed had already died. A few days later, Cousteau's divers scoured the bottom for signs of life. Of the millions of squid that had made the waters alive, nothing survived. As though covered with snow, the ocean bottom was white with the bodies of the squid. They had fulfilled their purpose, and it was all over. All that the divers found were acres of egg cases now covered with a leathery skin to protect them. Inside each egg case, another generation of sea arrows waited to be born. They would come singly out of their eggs, begin to grow, move out to sea, and continue the cycle of life. Then, at their appointed time, they would return to the breeding ground as their parents had done to meet their destiny and die. In the last days of the squid's life, 2 of the Calypso's crewmen swimming the bottom came upon a female trying to push the last egg case from her body. Gently, they helped her by pulling out the case and attaching it to a rock. Then, joining the rest of her sea arrow family, she too died. The instinct to fulfill the breeding cycle is so deep that no single sea arrow could thwart or change it. The meaning of existence for the squid is species wide. It is provided by its instinctual makeup. Is it conceivable that man has been totally separated from that evolutionary past when the instincts determine all significant behavior? If our problems are species-wide, as Morris and others believe, is it not possible that there also exist impulses to meaning, goal-directed instincts, which are species-wide? Might there not be such leftover urges moving in us, pulsing in the dimmest reaches of our being so that we are unaware of them, yet determining still our most basic behavioral patterns? As a psychologist, Abraham Maslow believed he had discovered such drives. He was convinced that the human being has within him a pressure, among other pressures, toward unity of personality, toward spontaneous expressiveness, toward full individuality and identity, toward seeing the truth rather than being blind, toward being creative, toward being good, and a lot else. That is, the human being is so constructed that he presses toward fuller and fuller being. There is a single ultimate value for mankind, a far goal toward which all men strive. This is called variously by different authors self-actualization, self-realization, integration, psychological health, individuation, autonomy, creativity, productivity. But they all agree that this amounts to realizing the potentialities of the person, that is to say, becoming fully human, everything that the person can become. It is still not out of the question that man, unique among living things, lies free and lost. Perhaps Sartre is right in saying, we are condemned to be free. Perhaps there is no God, no goddess, no spirit, no fate, no moral law, no phylogenetic urge to life, no instinct, and no meaning. Perhaps Kierkegaard was right. There is no truth except truth for me. Truth for me. The nihilistic existentialists have consistently held that the cosmos is depressingly meaningless and human society absurd. Our lives can achieve meaning only if we boldly grasp the choices before us and make whatever meaningful responses we can. To be sure, many of us wake up each morning and wonder why. Richard Strauss composed the great tone poem, Also Sprach Zarathustra, in the spring and summer of 1896, and based it on passages from Nietzsche's book of the same title. Written a dozen years earlier, Strauss himself wrote, I meant to convey by means of music an idea of the development of the human race from its origin through various phases of its development, religious and scientific, up to Nietzsche's idea of the Superman. The whole symphonic poem is intended as a homage to Nietzsche's genius. Will the mind of man ever solve the riddle of the world? A few calm introductory bars, and already the trumpet sounds PP, their solemn motto CGC, the so-called World Riddle theme, which in various rhythmic guises will pervade the whole symphonic poem through its very end. The simple but expressive introduction grows quickly in intensity and ends majestically on the climatic C major chord of the organ and full orchestra. And then comes the mystical conclusion which, ending in two different keys, aroused much controversy when the work was first performed. While the trombones stubbornly hold the unresolved chord C, E, F sharp, the violins and upper woodwinds carry outward the theme of the ideal to higher register in B major, the pizzicati of the basses, all the while sounding repeatedly the CGC of the World Riddle. Evidently, the great problem remains unsolved. And this is the end of this chapter. Now, as I did in the previous one, I will read some citations that I have here. Let's start with Louis Wirth. The most important thing we can know about a man is what he takes for granted. And the most elemental and important facts about a society are those that are seldom debated and generally regarded as settled. The foundations, could be said. Another one by W.T. Jones. Philosophy is the eternal search for truth, a search which inevitably fails and yet is never defeated, which continually eludes us, but which always guides us, eludes us. This free intellectual life of the mind is the noblest inheritance of the Western world. It is also the hope of our future, the eternal search for truth. Another quote by Gordon Allport. Every man, whether he is religiously inclined or not, has his own ultimate presuppositions. He finds he cannot live his life without them, and for him they are true. Such presuppositions, whether they be called ideologies, philosophies, notions, or merely hunches about life, exert creative pressure upon all conduct. what are our presuppositions? We should ask ourselves. Another one by Hans Selye. It says, realistic people who pursue practical aims are rarely as realistic or practical in the long run of life as the dreamers who pursue their dreams. Another one by Albert Camus. To lose one's life is a little thing, and I shall have the courage to do so if it is necessary. But to see the meaning of life dissipated, to see our reason for existing disappear, that is what is unbearable. One cannot live without meaning. Here we have another one by André Gide or Gide. The idea that so much suffering can be in vain is intolerable to me. It kept me awake all night. I'm awake now. We have another one by Lauren Isley. The story of Eden is a greater allegory than man has ever guessed, for it was truly man who, walking memoryless through paths of sunlight and shade in the morning of the world, sat down and passed a wandering hand across his heavy forehead. Time and darkness, knowledge of good and evil, have walked with him ever since. And here we have another one. I had another one, the long one here. This is another one by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Without a firm idea of himself and the purpose of his life, man cannot live and would sooner destroy himself than remain on earth, even if he was surrounded with bread. Another one by, taken from Mission Impossible. The world's a failure, you know. Someone, somewhere, made a terrible mistake. A negative point of view. Another one from The Ritual of Evil from NBC TV. The world has always been ruled by Lucifer. The world is evil. Call his name, my love. Call the name of Lucifer. Another one by John Buchan. I would write of that prehistoric life when man was knit close to nature. I would describe the people who were brothers of the red earth and the red rock and the red streams of the hills. I would show you the unknown, the hideous shrinking mystery at the back of his simple nature. Men would see the profundity of the old crude faiths which they affect to despise. I would make a picture of our shaggy, somber-eyed forefather, who heard strange things in the hills' silences. I would show him brutal and terror-stricken, but wise. God alone knows how wise. Here there is another one from René Dubois, from the Torch of Life. From what is presently known, Homo sapiens, the modern form of man, has existed on Earth for approximately 100,000 years in numbers large enough to constitute a population. Barring catastrophic accidents, it can be expected that man will continue living on Earth for many millions of years. Using a somewhat fanciful kind of arithmetic, it can be calculated from these figures that the present age of humanity corresponds to very early childhood in the life of a human being. Pursuing still further the same far-fetched comparison, reading and writing were invented a year ago. Plato, the Parthenon, Christ date from but a few months. Experimental science is just a few weeks old, and electricity a few days. Mankind will not reach poverty for another 100,000 years. In this perspective, it is natural that, so far, mankind should have been chiefly concerned with becoming aware of the world of matter, listening to fairy tales and fighting for pleasure or out of anger. The meaning of life, the problems of man and of society, become dominant preoccupation only later during development. As mankind outgrows childhood, the proper use of science may come to be not only to store food, build mechanical toys, and record allegories, myths, and fairy tales, but to understand as well as possible the nature of life and of man in order to give more meaning and value to human existence. Here there is another one by Macbeth. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets with his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And Horace say, nil desperandum. That means there's no cause for despair. And finally, Kismet. Wise men come ever promising the riddle of life to know. Wise men come, but over the sands, the silent sands of time, they go. And that's it. Okay? Think about these ideas, ponder about them, find your own meaning, find your own reason. That is the message of this chapter, that each one of us has to find the reason for living, for making sense to this world riddle, our existence, why we're here, where are we going, to answer the questions, the unanswerable questions, I think, in our own special and unique way. The next chapter will be the spirit of philosophy. Okay? May you all have an excellent day. Bye.